This week, one of the most known haunted buildings in the world overshadows a legendary ghost of Reformatory Road in Ohio. Same in this show too, when I eventually talk about Phoebe Wise. Now shockingly you wouldn't expect it, but I actually have a connection to Mansfield Reformatory going back years ago. I don't do these types of events anymore, but I used to be involved on a light basis with something known as ghost bus tours. Not ghost busters, ghost bus tours. So these were, we would rent a bus, charge a decent ticket price for what was given, and we would drive to a haunted location and usually spend the night. It wasn't my personal favorite thing to do. I'm not, if you listened before, I'm not the most into the investigation side of things. I'm just all about the ghost stories, but, it was interesting because I could go to places like West Virginia Penitentiary and Mansfield Reformatory, which I'm about to talk about, visit these locations, be inside them at night, do investigations, but, I get pretty late. I'm kind of an old man at heart. I love the early bird special. I want to be in bed by 9 p.m. So when you're in a location and you know that you're going to have to be there till about 3 a.m., and then the bus, comes and gets you and takes you back, and I can't sleep on buses, I can't sleep on planes. So it wasn't a good fit for me. But there was 2 locations that I did get to take advantage of, 3 actually. One was West Virginia Penitentiary, which I'll always love the fact that I saw that building. It's on a different level when it comes to ghosts and dark history, of course. The other one, the Ottawa jail. So there's a couple times these bus tours went up to Ottawa. Those were my personal favorites. Not out of Canadian pride or anything like that, but just the fact that I love the city of Ottawa. It wasn't the most comfortable accommodations. We stayed overnight inside the Ottawa jail. Not the best accommodations, but, we made do. And the fact that you're inside the Ottawa jail at night, the ghosts going up to death row in the middle of the night, using a Ouija board inside Patrick Whalen's cell. I've talked about this before. It's second to none. And the last one, of course, has to be Mansfield Reformatory. Now, Mansfield Reformatory is a jail. They call it a reformatory, but, compared to current day standards, definitely not. This would have been something that would be 100% considered a punishment. So the building itself was built in 1886, and go ahead and do a search for it. Mansfield Reformatory, and have a look at the building. You can see that this was not it looks beautiful. The design of it is amazing. It's got that Gothic feel. But if you look at pictures on the inside, tallest cell blocks in the entire world, these are 6-story cell blocks. So even if you're on the top, all you're really staying, you can stare out to a window. You might not have a view of the outside world, but sometimes some natural light will come through. But it's still, this is not something that's built on hope. If I had a jail cell inside this place, I would not feel hopeful. It was the opposite of hope. I'd feel discouraged on life. So I obviously over the years, these things changed. You think that you're reforming people back in the day. You're not really doing that. So the feeling around it changes. Eventually, you realize that it's actually inhumane. And by 1990, they had shut it down. And 1990 really doesn't feel that long ago. It is 30 years ago, but it was technically quote-unquote modern times. So the fact that they actually still had inmates in there throughout the 80s, it surprises me. But they ended, 1990, they closed it for inhumane conditions. Reminds me a little bit like the Don Jail in Toronto. This was built originally to be a modern facility in the 1800s. But the biggest mistake that they did, and that was the mistake that happened with pretty much every jail, asylum. The original thought is, we'll put for example, 1,000 people inside this building. So build me a building that can fit 1,000 people. And within 10 years, it's like, oh, there's more than 1,000 people who commit crimes or act a little nuts. So then you have a building that has 5,000 people and a building built for 1,000 people. And you crowd them all in, and what's going to happen? Fights, violence. It's just a terrible situation. So that's what happened with the Don Jail in Toronto. So a Canadian jail, that the inhumane conditions in there were so bad that it took a reporter for, I believe, the Toronto Star to expose this. And the Don Jail, even after that, was still being used as a jail until they finally gave up. They closed the Don Jail in the year 1977. This is actually the year that I was born, so it was about, 21 years ago? I'm sorry. It was 47 years ago. God damn it. Anyway, so Mansfield Reformatory also closed in 1990. Inhumane conditions was the statement, and it became an abandoned building. Now, you might know this place, and I'm sure, unless you lived under a rock, you know what I'm about to say. This is Shawshank Prison. So if you've seen the amazing Oscar-winning Shawshank Redemption movie, which is based on a short story written by the author Stephen King, it was in the book Different Seasons. It's definitely a good read. 3 of the 4 stories in Different Seasons were made into movies. So it definitely was one of Stephen King's most known short story collection. The story that this was based on was Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. Of course, Rita Hayworth was the poster that was up on Andy Dufresne's wall. I'm not going to say too much because, I mean, it's possible you haven't seen it, which if you haven't, I mean, watch it. Like, pause this episode right now and just go watch Shawshank Redemption. One of the best movies ever made. One of my personal favorites. I love Stephen King, but, I mean, this definitely is, like, top there. And the other 2 stories from the same book that were turned into movies was the one called The Body, which was made into Stand By Me. And the other one was Apt Pupil. If you haven't seen that one, that's a good one as well. That was with Brad Renfro and Ian McKellen, directed by Bryan Singer. It was a good movie. Didn't get the best reviews, but I thought it was interesting. I enjoyed it. So it's got that fame behind it, which brings tourists out to see it. But it also has something else. Now, I call this historic buildings saved by ghosts, and it's not talked about enough because unfortunately I'm from Canada, Southern Ontario. We have a lot of older buildings that this would be amazing for. So in the United States, there's some really large original asylums, original prisons, and these buildings would have been long since demolished, so they stopped with their original purpose for whatever reason, and then they end up abandoned. So what are you going to do with a building like this? You know, it's abandoned. There's no other real purpose. It's not like you're going to turn it into a retirement home, for example. I mean, that would not be a good place for the seniors to live. I wouldn't. Who would do that to their grandparents? Like, nobody. So you don't really have any other purposes for it. But the ghost hunting phenomenon is so very popular. Now, in the States, definitely on a different level of popularity than what you might have in Canada. But in Canada as well, it's still also very popular. If certain museums, they open up for these ghost hunts, more likely than not, they're going to sell out. So when you have these massive locations that can have a decent amount of people coming in and you offer overnights as part of the experience, you know, you set them up with an actual paranormal investigative group, you know, people who know how to search for ghosts. It's almost like it's part training, it's part fear, it's part tour. I mean, you can get history, you can get ghost stories. And this is why in the States, these buildings, they take off. So places like West Virginia Penitentiary, Trans-Allegheny Asylum, and of course Mansfield Reformatory, the only reason they still exist is because of these ghost hunting experiences. History tours, I'm sure, are a big part of it as well. But I mean, let's admit it. Let's just be completely honest. It's all about the ghosts. This is what's bringing in the money. So, and there's a reason why we brought the bus tours down there to experience it. Now, I don't normally talk about my Haunted Hamilton days. I'm very much dedicated to the ghost walks. Even during my time with Haunted Hamilton from the beginning on, I was still kind of like moving into the ghost walks. Because Haunted Hamilton was very much into the investigations. We had a team, myself, my ex. We had psychics. We had the scientific thinkers. We'd go out to locations. We'd do investigations. That's basically what Haunted Hamilton was. If you don't know, I got my start. I was writing articles based on those investigations, the locations we'd investigate, other haunted locations that caught our fancy. So that was kind of my job as part of it. I wasn't really too much in the investigation side of it, even though I had the knowledge to do it. It just wasn't something that interested me overall. So I don't really talk about that time because I was always kind of a ghost walks guy, even from the beginning. And of course, today that's 100% what I do. It's all about the history, dark and interesting, and it's all about, of course, the ghost stories. But for this one, I'm going to go back to that because Haunted Hamilton was technically the banner that the bus tour that we went to Mansfield Reformatory was under. So I kind of just, tag along on these and as a co-host with my ex. And on one occasion, somebody else came with us, and it was my ex's mother. Now, she was known as H.H. Mum, M-U-M, and everybody loved her. She was a very lovable person. So all the people in the bus, they would find a connection with her, and so she was like the mum of the group. So it was fun having her along. I mean, she really knew how to interact with folks, and as well, and I'll state this, even though I know some have questioned from the HH days, she was an accomplished psychic. Like, I was amazed by this. Some people have asked me, do you believe that she actually has these abilities? The answer is yes, because I personally witnessed situations. I knew her very well, and I personally witnessed situations where she came up with information to strangers she had just met that she couldn't have possibly known. So like a stranger would be talking to her about, something in her life, somebody who had passed away, and she'd have this information just kind of ready and say, oh, yeah, you remember this in your life? This person used to call you this nickname, and it was all 100% right. She didn't know these people. I knew she was only meeting them for the very first time. So it just floored me. So I did believe H.H. Mum was an accomplished psychic, that she had this ability. And I'll state that on the record right now for all you guys to know. So the reason I bring this up is because she had an interesting experience that she wrote down for us at Mansfield, and I wanted to share that with you now. So as I mentioned with the description of the setup of Mansfield Reformatory, you need to note that it had the tallest cell block structure in the entire world. I mean, jump out, go on Google, do a search for Mansfield Reformatory cell block. There are beautiful pictures of the inside. You can see how massive this thing was. And you really don't get a feel for it until you're actually standing inside there during a tour and you look up. And just like think the people on the top level must have been, I mean, if you're scared of heights and that's your cell, I mean, that's just another level of torture that's being put on you as part of your punishment. So the place really had a feel for it. So when you're walking through, you're hearing about what had happened, the ghost stories, etc., etc. Well, H.H. Mum, she got distracted by something. So we were walking through. This was after the tour. We were doing our own little investigation. So as she conveyed to us that the team was walking slowly down one of the narrow walkways of one of the jail cell rows. Now, I don't think we could go very high. I think you could only go up to the third level. I think anything beyond the third level was blocked off for safety reasons because you'll see from the pictures that the steel of the levels has rusted out quite a bit. So we were in complete darkness and just had like a few flashlights. H.H. Mum was at the back. So she's falling down the narrow row, and at one point she says she heard a voice call out from one of the cells. Now, she didn't want to stop because the team had gotten a bit ahead of her. She didn't want to yell out for them because it would have disturbed everybody else who was trying to investigate. You have to be very mindful investigator that you don't make too much noise. because some people might be doing sound or video recordings, and you don't want to have any false EVPs, voice phenomenon. So she didn't want to stop them. So she just stayed back and listened for a bit. Now, she didn't have a flashlight. She's standing there in the pitch black, so you can understand how dedicated she was to this moment. So the team turns off, and she stayed near the cell. And she also said that something was stopping her, like her feet were frozen to the ground, like this is where she needed to be. So in darkness, no flashlight, listening to the voice, she actually goes to the cell. This is where the energy feels like it's coming from. And as she walks in, she said she heard a quiet and nervous voice saying, "Help me." And then a second word that she didn't make out in the moment. She said it sounded like the name Roz, so R-O-Z. It did take her a moment to get into the cell because of, the way the doors can kind of rust half shut, so it was slightly ajar. You have to kind of really jimmy it open. And when she finally did, she steps into the cell, and she said that a spirit appeared directly in front of her. So she could see this. She could see spirits every now and then. We believed her on that regard as well. And that this ghost shows up being tough and mean. Felt that he was the inmate that was in control of the cell. And he was standing directly in front of another spirit who was kind of sitting in the corner all defeated and wanting help. And when she tried to go towards the spirit who wanted help, the other one stepped in front of her and said, "Back off." So she's having this battle in the darkness of a cell in Mansfield Reformatory, and we're the team ahead. We have no idea what's going on. So she's standing there and hearing the other spirit keep repeating the name Roz over and over again. So she, as a accomplished psychic, wanted the spirit to rest. So he tells the spirit to go into the light. And at this point, the team had returned. So we realized that H.H. Mum was gone. We turned around and came back for her, coming into the cell to retrieve her and shining the light so she could get out the door. And as they were walking out the door, that's when a couple of the members, I wasn't one of them, kind of yelled out because they were shining the flashlights around and they caught a name that had been written on the cell wall. Can anybody guess what that name is? Roz. R-O-Z. So it was a good experience. We were all a tad bit shaken up afterwards. Didn't really get any information. I don't know if they had information from that cell. If there was, we didn't really have time in the middle of the night to go search through the records for it. Never really got any follow-ups on it if there was an inmate in that cell named Roz, but it was written on the wall, so maybe it was Roz as the inmate, or like Roz, I believe, is short for Rosalind. And if that was the case, since it was only men inside the prison, it's very possible that it could have been a girlfriend or a wife on the outside, and the inmate was just calling out for her because he missed her, he loved her, because he was scared, something along those lines. So Mansfield Reformatory, just from what I've mentioned so far, it's only a drop in the bucket of how historic and haunted this place actually is. But that wasn't the original focus of this episode. I hope you enjoyed that journey down Reformatory Lane. Now it's time to go down Reformatory Road. See what I did there? Reformatory Road, also a haunted place. So this is in regards to a woman who had a log cabin, like a wood house, that once stood on Reformatory Road. This would have been directly across the street from what was originally known the Ohio State Reformatory, now known as Mansfield. So Reformatory Road ran between, and then you had this land and a wood house, and that belonged to Phoebe Wise. And she lived there pretty much her whole life. I believe it was her family's home, and she eventually inherited it. Starting out as a regular person, would eventually have legends associated with her that would change the way people viewed her as the strange woman living by herself right beside the reformatory. Now the locals, very involved in her life, they do remember, even today, the way the house looked. It was a beautiful area. There's lilacs. There was a lily pond. and lots of land that was owned by Phoebe Wise. Now, I'm going to go back to the late 1800s. This is when a lot of the situations occurred, because in the late 1800s, they had the legend and thoughts about her believing that Phoebe was insane. The reason for this is she's living by herself, and they would witness her having these full conversations with her horse, her dog, and many stray cats. Now, I personally hear that situation. I don't consider it crazy. How many of you have talked to your dog or cat? Seriously, I mean, maybe back in those days you didn't talk to your dog and cat. Nowadays you do, including me. I talk to my dog all the time. So am I crazy? Maybe. So the farm was inherited from her father. He passed it down to Phoebe. He was a successful surveyor in the town of Mansfield, Ohio, for which the reformatory is currently named after. Now, after his death in 1887, the house fell into disrepair. And Phoebe was the only one living inside. So I guess she didn't have any friends, didn't bother with anybody coming over, handymen to fix up the house. She just kind of accepted and lived that way. Probably disconnected from the rest of the people in the town, so she wouldn't bother talking to them or asking for help. But the other side of it was she didn't have money to pay people to help her fix it out. Her money issues were so bad. I mean, she didn't work, so nothing was really coming in, just living off of her family's inheritance, that eventually she had to sell half of her land. And for some reason, and I don't get it, you're living in a dilapidated wood house, and you got some nice land, but for some reason people thought she was rich, because they said that she didn't trust banks. So where do you put it, right? I mean, the old adage of putting all the money under the mattress, they just assumed that there must have been a fortune inside the house. So on Christmas Eve in 1891, this was things start to get a little bit nuts. 3 men needed money, and they wanted to prove that the fortune was real, so they went to visit Phoebe Wise. Now, Phoebe heard something. She walked into the living room, and the men had gotten inside the house. They were standing in the darkness of the living room holding guns. They had bandanas, like bandits, covering over their faces, so she couldn't see who they were. Now, one jumped forward and grabbed Phoebe by the throat and started to squeeze, and one of the other men yelled out, "Where's the money?" Now, she coughed out, thinking quickly in the moment. She said the words, "I'll show you," but didn't move. So they were this crazy lady's just playing with us. So they tied her to a chair. They lit a torch, fire, and they tortured her. They burned her feet, and while they were burning her feet, they were screaming, "Where's the money? Where's the money?" Of course, I mean, no matter who it is, after a while, they're just not going to be taken. She's not James Bond or anything like that. So she gave up. There's no fortune. I mean, obviously she was hard up for cash. So all she could do was lead them. She had a diamond ring. She had a gold watch, a family gold watch and gold chain. She had a little bit of cash, but there was no treasure. So after this, the frustrated men, they tied her back to the chair, and they just sat in the kitchen and ate pie while deciding how they were going to share the loot, and then eventually left. Now, the police did help Phoebe Wise. I know the story always goes that the police would ignore her and say, "Oh, you're just a crazy person." No, when she reported this, they actually did respond. They arrested the men. They arrested them, but nothing happened. So there's the stereotypical situation coming back into play. Neither of the men spent any time in jail. But sadly for Phoebe Wise, this crime brought unwanted fame to her. So already she had the terrible legend of being kind of a strange person. People would avoid her for that. And now the crime brings even more interest in Phoebe, and she didn't like that. And after this, there was a stranger, a fellow we only know by the name Jacob, and he started stalking her. But I mean, not in the way you're thinking. It's not just like to gain some kind of weird fame for this. He actually loved her. He was in love with Phoebe Wise, and he thought they were meant to be together. He'd constantly go out to Reformatory Road at night. He would go up to the house, and from the darkness outside, he would like tap on the window to get her attention. She'd look over and just see like the shadow of a man standing out there. Must have terrified her. He would knock at the door, he'd look through the windows and just see him standing out there. Now Jacob would report to others when he was talking to people in town that Phoebe was amazing, and that she was enticing him on purpose by playing her beautiful piano music from inside the house. So this continued to escalate. Nobody did anything to help Phoebe or to stop the situation, and it escalated to the point that he broke into the house and he assaulted her. Now this obviously was beyond the line, and Jacob was arrested, and he was sent to jail and eventually transferred to an insane asylum, spent some time there, and eventually was released. And after being released, guess where's the first place that Jacob went to? You got it, the house on Reformatory Road. He goes straight back to Phoebe Wise, goes up to the house, and from outside he's yelling. The window's open, it's a hot day, so he's yelling through the window, "Marry me or kill me, Phoebe Wise." Can anybody guess which one she chose? Yes, the second option. So I personally do not condone killing. This is a statement I am willing to make. I am not pro-killing. However, and please take this with a grain of salt, I think she had a right to do this. So what did Phoebe do? She pointed a rifle through the open window and fired directly on Jacob, instantly killing him. Now, the Mansfield News Journal for Mansfield, Ohio, they reported it the next day, and I think they had the best line to kind of describe the whole situation. Quote, "Phoebe Wise rids herself of an intolerable nuisance." And as you can guess, she wasn't arrested for the crime. Now, I mean, nowadays, this is like the old-timey justice. Nowadays, I'm sure she would have been arrested, put on trial, but I doubt any jury would have convicted her. I mean, this man would not leave her alone, assaulted her in a terrible way. It just, this is what was bound to happen. And if anything, I'm sure the police kind of said, yep, this is what we expected. Now, that situation of her killing Jacob happened in 1898. She continued to live on the land and grow older. I believe the thumbnail of this show will be her face as an old woman. And she died at 1933. So she died, she was about 81 years old, between 81 and 82 years old in 1933. So she would have been in her late 40s when Jacob was obsessed with her. And now she's dead. So the famed house. What happened to the house? As I mentioned, it's no longer there. There's nothing there anymore, not even a foundation to see. It was left abandoned after Phoebe's death. But then locals get involved. You have some of the more rough type locals. They believe that the treasure is still inside there. So they would go in on different nights and just tear it apart. Tore up the floors, tore up the walls, but nothing was ever found. So the whole treasure thing was completely just a rumor. It was not true. So today it is the empty field. However, people say that Phoebe's still there. The story goes that you will see a woman walking along Reformatory Road at night. Is like a slight glowing figure of an older woman. Say she's hunched over in the fields as if she's still working the land. But for most, with the ghost hunters, there's no reason for them to be on that road. And if you go too far on the road, eventually you end up on military land. It's an area that you're not allowed to be on. For example, you can't go to the Reformatory's graveyard because that's technically too close to a military base. And they'll think that you're somebody plotting on them, so they'll send a car out to meet you. I've heard that that's happened to some ghost hunters in the past. So there's no reason to be on the road to look for Phoebe Wise. So the only way they can do their investigations is from Mansfield Reformatory. So it's very well known with the ghost hunters to find the best windows that stare out to where the house used to be. They can map this out, and from there, look for Phoebe, look for her glowing figure among the fields. And we've had some results, nothing that has been posted in detail, but who knows, one day that might change. Anyways, that's the show, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. I appreciate every single one of you. If you enjoy this podcast, again, the quickest way to support me, just leave a review and let me know what you think. I always like to hear suggestions. You could always leave a 5-star review and then tell me what's wrong with me. As long as I get the 5-star review, I won't cry myself to sleep tonight, and that's always a good thing. So however you listen, Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever, just leave the review on there. You can also join the Ghost Guy Daniel podcast Facebook discussion group. If you like to go in and get some background information, know when the episodes are posted, that's the best way to go. Anyway, thanks, and I'll talk to you next week.